So we'll start off with a video. There's no sound on this video, so don't worry if you don't hear anything, but kind of watch this and have a think about how similar it is to maybe your experiences of Agile transformations. So I see a lot of that in the organizations I go and work with, where somebody decides they're going to become more agile, or they pick a preferred approach that they're going to use, and they impose it on the organization. So it tells everybody this is what we're going to do, and then it doesn't work out. It's not successful. So I'm a little curious to start off with as to how similar that is to your experiences. So if on your either on your phone or your computer, if you go to www.menti.com, when you get there, you'll be asked to put in a code to get to this particular quiz. The code at the top there is 28959746. When you get that code, you should get a question, and I'm just going to switch over to Menti so I can, here we go, yeah, so I can bring that up. And once you're in, just answer this kind of first question. So thinking about your Agile transformation, either the one you're currently on or a recent one, how similar is it to that video that we've just seen? So hopefully you can get onto Menti. And it's, there we go, here we go. I'm going to hide the results just till we get enough responses. So I can see we've got about 20 people on the webinar, so I'll kind of wait till we get close to 20. Hopefully we'll get some more responses. Okay, maybe just give it another minute just to try and get a few more. Then we're up to 7. Okay, let's see what those results look like. If you're still going in there, feel free to add your results in, and we'll see if it makes a difference. So yeah, we can see there that the average is 3.1, and the you can see there's a definite skew. So 4 people put 3, 2 people put 4. So most people are kind of saying it's like the video. Interestingly, nobody's saying it's nothing like the video. So hopefully then the things I'm going to introduce in this session will help with those Agile transformations so that they're less like the video. So let's move on. I would keep Menti open. We're going to come back and use Menti a few more times during the presentation. We're going to have a little bit of a quiz just to kind of get you people thinking about some of the ideas, the concepts I'm going to introduce. So back to the slides. We've done Menti. So the idea behind this talk and what got me thinking about some of these ideas is this idea, and you can read this quote yourself, this idea of imposing Agile in organizations, and a lot of Agile transformations are brought about because somebody decides that Agile is the way to go, and there's a specific kind of form or flavor of Agile that they think is the right one, and that is forced on people. So, for example, somebody says a management, senior manager or a consultant comes in and says, right, safe's the way to go. Let's do safe. Or, I heard great things about Spotify. Let's use the Spotify model. And it, Dan Mesick says kind of some fairly strong words, but it's the most pressing issue of our time. So how do we avoid this imposition or infliction of Agile on organizations? Because that's probably what leads them to being less successful. But on the other hand, when I was thinking about this, as a consultant coming in and helping with an organization with an agile transformation, I am still kind of imposing something. I'm still bringing in a set of ideas and saying to that organization, I think you should do this. So how do we differentiate between this kind of disrespectful imposition of Agile, which is forced on people, and an imposition of Agile which is engaging people and it's not seen as disrespectful, so it kind of includes them and they're part of the transformation process rather than just being told what to do. So that led me to these 3 C's, kind of coherence, constraints, and curiosity. So those are the things I want to talk about now. So coherence, the quality of forming a unified whole. So how do we make our agile transformations coherent so that everybody's working together? All the different pieces, all the different ways of working fit together so that we get a good result. So a lot of the time when we do impose Agile, it's not coherent. And this is a nice tweet from John Cutler. He's picking on the Spotify model here. It's not that the Spotify model is wrong. It's just the popular model at the moment. But what we see is the things that are highly evolved and are very visible. So this is visualizing it with what's known as a Wardley map, where we have the value chain of what we see down through the chain through to what we don't see. And then each of those components, how evolved they are from just, Genesis, where they're just evolving, just emerging, through to commodities and utilities where they're everywhere and they're very cheap. So we can think of it as saying, what we see when we see the Spotify model is the highly visible piece of the way Spotify work and the pieces that are most evolved and most mature. But there's lots of other things going on in Spotify that are less visible to us and are still evolving, still emerging. Spotify is still figuring some of these things out to themselves. We don't see these things, and because they've not matured yet, we can't copy them. So we're only copying a little bit of it. So we don't end up with a cohesive approach to our transformation. There's lots of other stuff that just doesn't fit. All this stuff here we don't see. When we can't copy it, we'll probably end up trying to mix Spotify with some existing ways of working, and that's not going to work. And what typically happens in trying to deal with that is we kind of mix up alignment and autonomy. So we want to go agile. We want everybody to be working in an agile way. So we tell people what to do. We introduce new practices and new processes, and therefore we try to achieve alignment at this end of the scale by reducing and eliminating people's autonomy and to decide how to work. So we achieve alignment by telling people what to do, and therefore people don't get their own choices to take action. The other way we could look at it is, well, hey, let's give people autonomy. Let's just allow people to do what they want. Let's allow people to solve their own problems and figure things out to themselves. The risk is therefore then we don't get any alignment because people do anything. Now, actually, a guy called Helmut von Moltke, who was a chief of staff in the Prussian army in the 18th, 19th century, he realized that this dichotomy was false. It's not actually true. And what you can do is treat them as separate axes. So we can have high alignment, and we get high alignment by clarifying the intent of what we want people to achieve, but we don't tell them how to do it. And then given that intent, people can have autonomy to take action. So if we apply this to our agile transformations, what we're wanting to do is make sure people understand the intent of the Agile transformation. Why do we want to go Agile? Why do we think Agile is going to help us? What problems is it going to solve? What's it going to help us achieve as an organization? That's the intent. And then people can figure out how to take action in order to meet that intent. And they can work out what their own processes are, what tools they should use, what techniques they should use, and the things that are going to work for them. So the way I approach this, the way I look at it is with a model that I call TASTE. So that's True North, Aspirations, Strategies, Tactics, and Evidence. So True North is the first piece of trying to clarify intent. It's the orientation which informs what we should do. So in orientation, that's what direction should we be heading in as an organization. And when we're making decisions, are those decisions on what action to take? Are those actions taking us towards the true north or away the true north? If we know what the true north is and what the direction is, we can then make sure that everybody's moving towards that. So that's the first stage of intent. And then along with that is the aspirations, which are the results we hope to achieve. So if we move towards our true north, and if we're successful as an organization, what should we be able to achieve as an organization? And probably, whereas a true north is very much long-term, aspirations are maybe more medium-term. So when we get to the end of the year, what are our aspirations? What results at the end of the year will allow us to look back and say whether we've been successful or not? In order to meet those aspirations, we need strategies. So how are we going to do that? The assumption here is that without changing, we're not going to meet those aspirations and we're not going to move towards the true north. So we need to have some strategies in place which start, again, they're kind of another form of intent, start getting people understanding what we're trying to do. So they're guiding policies that enable choice. They don't tell people what to do, but there's some policies that help people choose what action they're going to take, and therefore they can take coherent action. So the tactics, what people do, the way we invest our time and our money, the changes that we actually make are our tactical decisions, and those tactics should implement our strategies. Once we've implemented those tactics, we hope to start seeing some evidence. So the tactics generate evidence. So they're outcomes that are going to start indicating that we are making progress towards achieving our aspirations. So aspirations are very much lagging measures. We don't know whether we've met our aspirations until the end of the year, say, but hopefully the evidence are more leading metrics. They should start indicating earlier whether we're doing the right thing. Are the tactics working? Are our strategies right? Can we meet our aspirations? So when I'm thinking and working with organizations on agile transformations, I'm trying to frame it this way. Well, what's the true north? What aspirations do you think your transformation is going to help you achieve? What are the strategies behind that transformation? Then what tactics are we going to do? What actually are we going to implement to achieve that transformation? And then what evidence will we look for that tells us whether that's working? And we can visualize that. Well, actually, the first thing is we want all those things to be coherent. So quite often, I'll maybe ask some questions around these 5 elements and they don't actually fit together. Or maybe there's some, the strategies just don't exist. Quite often people don't really understand what their strategies are. Or when you look at what they're doing isn't coherent with what their strategies are. So we can visualize this on what I call the X matrix. So this is an A3 kind of single size piece of paper, which contains the true north in the middle as the kind of the central thing that holds everything together. And then we can list out our aspirations, list out our strategies, list out our kind of primary tactics, the big focus areas that we're going to work on, list out the evidence and the metrics that we're going to capture. And then we can just put dots in the corners. Each of these cells in the matrices in the corner, and this is why it's called the X matrix, because these matrices form an X. We can start visualizing how strong the coherence are. So in this cell here, I can look at and we can talk about, does this strategy help us meet our aspiration? If it does, I can put a nice solid dot in there. Maybe it's kind of related to the aspiration, but it's not directly related. At that point, I might put an empty dot, kind of a black ring with a kind of white in the middle to kind of indicate that there's some connection there, but not. Or I might discover actually this strategy's got nothing to do with this aspiration, in which case I'll leave it empty. So that this X matrix allows us to start visualizing how coherent our transformation is. Do we understand what all these pieces are, and do we understand how those pieces fit together? So very much about making sure that people understand intent and making sure that what people are doing to meet that intent is coherent with the intent. So we're going to go back to Menti now. And what you should get next is the ability to, if you've not already, become a player in a quiz. So get yourself in the quiz, put your name in. I think we had 7 people before, so let's kind of try and get at least 7 people. Let's try and get a few more. So it's just a bit of fun, but I'm going to ask you a question to do with coherence. It's a multiple choice question. You'll get 3 options. The quicker you answer the question, the quicker you select the option, the more points you're going to get. We're going to do 3 questions over the course of the webinar, and there'll be a leaderboard to see who answers the most questions the quickest. So answer questions right, answer them quicker, the more points you get. Right, we've got 8 people in. Anybody else want to join? Give it a few more seconds. Is there a question? Okay, we've got 9 people. That should be enough. So I'm going to go in and we'll start the first question. The question will come up on your phone, select the answer. You've got a time limit. Once the time runs out, we'll see who's answered it correctly, and I'll just talk through the answers. So which of these multiple choices is a coherent intent for an agile transformation? Implementing SAFe, reducing customer churn, or saving the world? It looks like everybody answered. We'll just let the clock tick down. So 7 people said reducing customer churn, 1 implementing SAFe, 1 saving the world. So as I said, this is just a bit of fun. This isn't a definitive scientific right answer. This is just the way I think about things. So let me just describe my rationale here. I think reducing customer churn is a good coherent intent because it's business focused, it's customer focused. If we reduce customer churn, then we're going to lose less revenue. We're going to have happier customers. We might even get new customers because customers start kind of raving about how our product is. So it's related to product quality. So an agile transformation might help us towards that because it might help us deliver. 1, we can respond to customer more quickly. We can deliver more value sooner, so we can get more value to those customers. We can probably start delivering a higher quality of product as well. So there's a number of areas there which Agile is going to help us to increase our customer satisfaction, reduce our customer churn. For me, implementing SAFe is a tactical piece. It's a way that we become more agile, but it's not the agile isn't the intent. Agile is the means, it's not the end. The end is reducing customer churn. And then saving the world, it's a bit woolly or fluffy, unless you're in the business of innovating for saving the environment, next generation energy sources or something like that. There's an argument that then your intent might be to save the world, but I think for most organizations, yeah, we'd like to save the world, but is that really what we're trying to do as an organization? Is that the intent before our agile transformation? Maybe a little bit too much of a stretch. So that's the way I think about it. So your intent ideally is something that's business related, and customer related. You're helping make things life better for your customers so that you can be more successful as an organization. So we should get a leaderboard now. See who got that right. So it looks like Murali, well done. You were slightly quicker than Naveen. Well done. Okay, so leave Menti open. We're going to do another couple of more questions and the leaderboard will build up after that. So keep Menti open for the moment. And in the meantime, we'll go back to the slides and we'll move on to the next section. So constraints. What do I mean by constraints? So the dictionary definition of a constraint, it's a limit or restriction. And typically we think of constraints as being kind of negative. They kind of they are that idea of limiting. But I think we can think of constraints in multiple ways. So Alicia Guerrero wrote a great book. It's kind of quite heavy going, but she talks about constraints in terms of changes in probabilities. So the metaphor here is, and the image is white noise. When you have white noise, you have no constraints within that noise, and it's white noise because there are no constraints. So every possible kind of sound and frequency is equally probable. As soon as you start introducing some constraints in and start filtering and applying acoustics and those sorts of things, that's when you start getting some sounds to be more likely than others. So adding constraints to white noise stops it being white noise, and we now get some more recognizable and distinct patterns. So the idea of introducing constraints into an agile transformation, if we have no constraints, then you get chaos. Anything could happen. We want some constraints such that we get some more probable outcomes. If we make those constraints too tight, now you get a very specific sound. So you don't get any range of probabilities. You get a specific one. So when we're dealing with complex problems, we don't necessarily know what the right answer is. So we want enough constraints in place so that we get more probable outcomes, but not so many that we lose any innovation and we lose any ability to play around and try new things. So Dave Snowden takes this idea and he refers to the similar idea as governing or enabling constraints. So the way I think about governing constraints is guiding what should not be. So governing constraints are very limiting. They tell you what to do specifically, and therefore they're at the same time they're ruling out lots of things that you don't do. Whereas enabling constraints are more about guiding what could be. So they're increasing the probabilities of certain outcomes, but not overly limiting them. So you still have a range of things. So enabling constraints will enable innovation and enable new ideas to emerge that hopefully then are coherent with what we're trying to achieve. So I think of strategy then as a form of constraint. So Mintzberg describes strategy as a pattern in a stream of decisions. So as we're making decisions along the strategy, those decisions should be coherent such that you can spot what the strategy is. So strategy doesn't tell you what to do, but it enables you and should help you make decisions on what to do. When you make those decisions, then you can hopefully get a range of outcomes based on those decisions. So it's about decisions and not plans. If you treat strategy as a plan, it's too much of a governing constraint because it's a strategy that tells you what to do. We don't want to tell people what to do. We want to enable people to make good decisions that are coherent with our intent. And that's really about just the humane aspect of Agile, really. We have good people with skills and knowledge and experience. If we just tell people what to do, we're losing all that knowledge, skills, experience. If we allow people to make decisions, then we're really leveraging and making the most of it. So there's another idea around here, and I'm kind of going back to Stephen Bungay. So Stephen Bungay, in this book of Art of Action, he talks about the Helmut von Moltke model of alignment and autonomy that I talked about. He builds on that with what he calls directed opportunism. So he says 3 things. You want to achieve outcomes. In order to achieve outcomes, you make some plans. You then take those plans and put them into action. And when you take action, you achieve the outcomes. But there are gaps between these 2 things, which is where things fall apart. So the knowledge gap is the difference between what we would like to know and what we actually know. So when we make plans, we don't necessarily know enough and know everything in order to make the right plan. And then when we make plans and we ask people to put them in the action, the alignment gap is the difference between what we want people to do and what they actually do. So we can have a great plan, but when people take action, they don't necessarily follow it in the way that we thought they were going to do. And then when they take action, we don't always get the outcomes we want. So that's the effects gap, the difference between what we expect our actions to achieve and what they actually achieve. So to manage those gaps, one way of doing it is just of of going for a more detailed approach. So to come up with better plans, we do more upfront planning, we get more detailed research, we do more analysis. And then when we got a plan and we wanted people to take action, we make those plans really detailed. So we give people really detailed instructions on what to do. And then to make sure that those actions achieve the outcomes we want, we put lots of detailed controls in place. So you spot the pattern there, just lots and lots of detail. What Bungay suggests is you go the other way, and actually you do less detail. So instead of doing lots and lots of analysis, you limit direction to defining and communicating the intent. So again, this is going back to coherence. Make sure people understand the intent. And then when you're making plans to meet that intent, you can allow people to effectively define their own plans and define what they decide how to take their own action. So closing the alignment gap, allowing each level to define how they'll achieve the intent themselves of the next level up, and back brief. And I'll come on to back brief, but back brief is the important bit here, because back brief is one of the ways we make sure that we have the right constraints in place. And then when people take action, we give people freedom to adjust their actions in line with the intent. So this is a model about creating coherence, but also starting to put some constraints in place. The intent is a form of constraint as well, but this idea of back briefing, so as we're allowing people to take action, back briefing is basically them replaying back to you their understanding of the brief that they've been given. So they brief back what their understanding is. So again, I use an A3 to do this, and I quite often tie this in where we do back briefing for one of the big tactics that we've identified on the X matrix. So the tactic becomes a mission for a team of people. And then back briefing, make sure that they understand, they're replaying their understanding of the context. What problem are we trying to solve, or what's the opportunity? What's the intent of this thing? And how does this help the business meet its higher intent? So what's our intent? What's the business's intent that we're helping? And then we get into, well, what are we actually going to do? So who do we need? What skills, resources, what people do we need? Do we understand our boundaries? What can we do and what can't we do? Again, this is kind of really where constraints come in, freedoms and constraints specifically. And then what's our plan? What are we going to do to meet the intent and the higher intent? And I like to think of the plan in terms of some hypotheses. What things are we going to test? Because we're going to learn here. And that's starting to lead into curiosity. So boundaries really in the back briefing is kind of making sure that people understand what they can do, what they can't do, and how what they're going to do is meets the intent. Quite often, generally, people think they're over-constrained, and they think that they have less freedom than they do. Equally, we probably do need some constraints in place, even if it's just budgetary constraints about how much money people can spend, or maybe technology constraints around what technology they can use. So A3 becomes, the back briefing A3 becomes a way of introducing some constraints that allow people to come up with their own solutions, but in line with the intent, and in a way that's not going to cause chaos. So we'll go back to Menti and we'll do a question on constraints. So the next question should come up, question 2 or 3. And I'm going to hit enter to start the countdown. Again, fastest answer gets more points. You'll get 3 options again. Which of these do you think is an enabling constraint? So specifically, which of these helps people figure things out for themselves? So increasing release frequency, standardizing on best practices, or being the best we can be? The last few seconds. Okay, looks like we lost a few people there. So increasing release frequency is the one I think is enabling constraint. And again, no scientific right answer here. This is just my way of thinking about it. But for me, increasing release frequency doesn't tell people how to do that. There are multiple tools and techniques and approaches to do that, but it helps people focus in on when we're deciding on what we're going to do, is what we're going to do help increase our release frequency? So it's a constraint because it gives us something to focus on. What we should be doing is increasing our release frequency, but it's not overly constraining. Standardizing on best practices, to me, that's, again, you're getting down to telling people what to do. Here's a best practice. Here's the standard best practices across the organization. That doesn't give people freedom and to think about things and be creative. Arguably, the notion of kind of standardizing on some practices, you could have some freedom within that to figure out what they are. So it's a bit, you could make an argument for that one. But generally, the idea of standardizing on best practices is more focused on kind of narrowing down, governing what people do rather than enabling them. And again, being the best we can be, too open. There's almost no constraint there. It's like, how does that help me decide what to do? It's a bit vague for me. So enabling constraints, things that help people decide what they're going to do and what the right approaches are in order to meet our intent. Okay, so we'll go leaderboard. Oh, sorry, I think I've just gone. Let me flick forward to the leaderboard again. So we just had 2 people there, got it right. So Morali, still in the lead, well done. So we'll come back and do one more question. So for now, let's move on into curiosity. So strong desire to know or learn something. So when I'm talking about imposing Agile with curiosity, I'm being a bit flexible because you can't impose curiosity on here, but I think you can invite curiosity. You can encourage curiosity and make sure that curiosity is seen as a good thing. So curiosity to me is about taking a scientific approach to things. So I don't know whether you're familiar with this game. This is a game called Mastermind that I used to play when I was a small child. And a year or so back, my daughter kind of dug this out one Christmas and wanted me to play with it. And I started taking a very scientific approach to how I played the game, which both taught my daughter a little bit about scientific thinking and also I think just ruined the game for her. So every time, so if you're not familiar with the game, you have a pattern, hidden pattern, and the idea is for somebody to kind of guess that pattern, and you lay out your guesses, and then you get feedback. White pegs here mean there's the right color in the wrong place. A black peg means the right color in the right place. So the way I approached this was, my first guess was I would just put all whites on. And the reason I did that was I was taking a very specific, basically running a very specific experiment. I had a hypothesis: are there any whites in the pattern? So when I get a number of dots, well, one, if there's a white in there, it will be in the right place. So the number of black dots I get basically tells me how many whites I've got in that pattern. And then I can kind of start mixing whites and blacks, so whites and, let's say whites and reds here, to start figuring out where that white is. So basically, I take a very step-by-step approach, and it's a very intentional approach to figure out what colors and then where are those colors. And I do this with workshops to help team into that idea of intentionally figuring out, what do I want to learn? I'm going to treat each guess as an experiment. What's my intent of that experiment? What do I want to learn? Was my experiment a success or a failure? Which basically means, did I get the result I thought I was going to get? So here, failure is not a bad thing. Failure just means we've learned something. And then what did I actually learn from it? So this is a kind of way of kind of getting people to think through intentionally having hypothesis and the notion that failure generates information. So what we're referring to here is this information theory curve here, where I have a probability of failure whenever I make a guess. I could have my probability of failure could be 100%, which is, I'm guaranteed to fail. In which case, again, I'm getting no information. If I know I'm going to fail, if I'm guaranteed to fail, I'm generating new information, no new information. Similarly, if my probability of failure is 0 and I'm guaranteed to succeed, it means I know everything. So I'm not generating any new information. That sweet spot at the top here is 50% failure. So failure is not a good thing. Failure is when we generate the most information. Again, probability of failure 50%. That doesn't mean I want to be failing 100%. It means I should be failing at least half the time, otherwise I'm not learning anything. Again, context matters though. When I get in an aeroplane, so when I did fly to India, I wanted the probability of failure of that aeroplane to be 0%. I'm kind of hoping they've learned everything there is to know about flying and the aerodynamics of that aeroplane. But when we're in agile transformations, we don't know everything. There's lots for us to learn about. How do we make it work for that context? So we want some sort of failure. And to me, that relates to curiosity, because I think we can just change the words on that graph. And our probability of failure, we can change to the amount of knowledge we have. If we think we know everything and we think we have 100% of knowledge, we don't need to be curious. Our curiosity will be 0 because we know everything. Equally, if our knowledge is 0, if we know nothing, again, we're probably not going to be curious because we don't even know what to be curious about. So this idea of we need to know something, but we don't need to do everything. We need to know enough to kind of be able to have a kind of a coherent hypothesis and start forming some experiments. But we need to recognize that we don't know everything and we might be wrong sometimes. And that's where we get into running experiments to try and get some of this learning. And I like Chris Argyris's ladder of inference here, because it really plays into that idea of maybe we don't know everything. Maybe what our understanding is different for somebody else's understanding for valid reasons. So this ladder of inference, the idea is that we start at the bottom of the ladder, and the bottom of the ladder is all of reality. We observe some of that reality, and then we select some of that we think of as important, and we interpret some meaning from it. From that meaning, we start making assumptions, drawing conclusions, adopting beliefs, and therefore we take action based on our belief. And what we intuitively do is jump straight up to taking action. We don't really intentionally or knowingly go through these stages, but they're there. When we get into taking action, quite often we think we're right. We just assume that all these steps that we've been through are the only things. The ladder of inference helps us to step down and start exploring, why might somebody else believe something different? Or what other beliefs might somebody else have? What conclusions may they have drawn? What assumptions may they have made? How might they have interpreted something differently and had some different meaning? Maybe they've actually selected a completely different bit of reality. Or maybe they've even observed some different reality. So just moving down this ladder and recognizing that what we know is just based on our experience. Other people have had different experiences, and let's understand what they are. But we still hold true to what we think. We're not just saying we're wrong. We think we're right, but let's understand. And that means that if we want to invite curiosity, if we want people to be more curious themselves, we actually have to be more curious ourselves. So the curiosity starts with ourselves. We have to ask other people about why they're taking actions, about what their beliefs are, about what conclusions they've drawn or the assumptions they've made, etc. So it's really about asking questions, recognizing that we might be wrong, people might be wrong, and therefore how do we learn that? Caitlin Walker describes it as noting things, how things were, wondering how they've come to be like this, and what we might like to have them next. And she defines the opposite of curiosity as contempt, which is I'm right, you're wrong, and therefore that's unacceptable. So rather than being contemptuous to people, let's be curious with people, and by being curious ourselves, we might encourage other people to be curious. And we can do that through running experiments. So the third A3 I'm going to show is an experiment A3. So as we start taking those hypotheses that we had in our back briefing, we can flesh those out. And again, we want to make sure that people understand the problem we're trying to solve. What's their hypothesis? So what do they believe that they're going to do? Why do they think that what they're going to do is a good thing? What's the rationale behind it? And then what action are they going to take? Results in terms of success and failure. So explicitly recognizing that our experiment might fail. So what things do we want to look for which might suggest that they're failing? If we just focus on success, you get kind of confirmation bias. That's all you see. And there might be some failure happening that you're not aware of. and we want these experiments to be small, safe to fail, so that we can learn without, putting people's lives at risk, put the company at risk, financial risk. So if this is successful, we're going to follow it up. So let's think about that ahead. And similarly, if this does turn out to be the wrong thing, if our hypothesis was wrong, is there any follow-up we need to do there just to kind of reverse anything, communicate what's going on or what's not happened? So the A3 then becomes a way of running A3 becomes a way of running experiments in order to be curious about what things might we try within our enabling constraints, which we think will help us meet our intent. We can learn from that and we can build on it. And to me, that's how ultimately you run a good agile transformation. So back to Menti. One more question, and then we'll kind of wrap up and we'll do some Q&A at the end. So
yeah, so anyone have any questions?
So should we just go through this Menti quiz first, okay, and then I'll get to Q&A at the end. So okay, we've got one more here. So this is about inviting curiosity. So which of these would invite curiosity? This is probably the hardest of the three questions. It's certainly the least serious of the three questions. So yeah, safety is the answer here. It's probably also the one where there is a most right answer. We want people to feel safe to fail. So a lot of organizations, failure is seen as a bad thing and a negative thing, and therefore people don't take risks. They don't want to run experiments and try things out because they don't feel safe. They don't feel like that there is a safety to fail. So we do want safety. Aticophobia in the middle. When I was putting this together, I didn't know what aticophobia was. It was a word I learned. Aticophobia is the fear of failure. So if you have a fear of failure, you have aticophobia. So we don't want people to be fearing failure, and equally we don't want judgment. So we don't want people to feel that they're being judged on whether their experiments succeed or fail. So these two, aticophobia, judgment, are kind of very much the opposite of safety. I have to say, I don't think I've done this when anybody knows what aticophobia was, and as I said, I didn't know what it means in the first place. It's not a common word, so again, just a bit of fun. So, but the really kind of just coming back to the point really is we want people to feel safe. If we can create an environment of safety, then we can start helping people, inviting people to be curious. And by asking questions ourselves, we can show that we're open to being wrong and we're open to learning, and therefore that's going to start creating some of that safety. Okay, so I think this is the final leaderboard. So just the three right answers there. And it looks like Murali, you hung on in there. Well done. So Murali, congratulations. Unfortunately, no prizes. I should have mentioned that earlier. But congratulations. So let's just go back to the slides, and I'll just wrap up with a few slides, and then we'll go into Q&A. So trying to tie some of those ideas together into what kind of a picture of a transformation. So the transformation really is our outcomes, the outcomes we want to achieve for the transformation, the plans we make for the transformation, and the actions people take. So those are the three things from Bungay. True Norths are about communicating the outcomes that we want to achieve and also what actions we want to take. So we want to take actions to achieve our True North and our aspirations, which are the outcomes. And those tend to come from a leadership team. And then operational teams start taking those True North and aspirations and starting thinking through what strategies do we want to have, where should we invest our time, and that's where you start linking outcomes and plans. And then you have the implementation teams who start thinking about, well, what tactics are we going to do, what's the actual work that we're going to do, and they start generating the evidence, And those are the things that start linking plans to action. And this isn't a one-way cycle. This is very much a collaborative process. It's not a linear process. So leadership teams are working and hopefully have visibility of what the implementation teams are doing so that they can steer. And similarly with the operational teams. So those three A3s that I showed kind of fit in here a little bit, because the X matrix is a way of communicating primarily between leadership team and operational teams. Operational teams do back briefing with their implementation teams. Implementation teams run or kind of complete experiment A3s, and that feeds back to the leadership team. The other way of thinking about it is nested PDCA cycles. So our whole transformation we can think of as one giant plan, do, study, act. So we're going to plan a transformation, start doing it, study the results and adjust. But as a transformation, that's kind of quite a big, long cycle. So as we start implementing our tactics, treat that as a next level down, sub-level PDSA. And then as we implement the tactics, we start running experiments, and that's another finer level PDSA cycle. And each of these then feeds back. Again, the X matrix, the back briefing A3 and the experiment A3 feed into this. So we're running our experiments as the smallest PDSA cycle, which feeds into our back briefing as a slightly larger PDSA cycle, and that feeds back into our X matrix as the highest level PDSA cycle. So transformation is really a process of running experiments within a set of constraints in order to meet some high level intent. And if we can frame it that way, yes, we're imposing a few things on people, but we're giving people the freedom to figure things out. And ultimately, it's about conversation. So this is a metaphor I picked up from Jeff Patton in his user story mapping book. He talks about a holiday photograph, and the holiday photograph having memories associated with it. So this is a holiday photograph from a holiday with my family 4 or 5 years ago now. It's actually not a great photograph because it's blurry. You know, you can't really see my daughter in there very well. You know, there's bubbles and light all over the place. But for me, there's lots of memories associated with that. So when we're using these A3s, they're not just documents to kind of pass around. The A3s capture the conversation. So it's the memory of what was said and felt that creates the alignment, not the final piece of paper. So we're using those A3s to help people talk about their intent, their understanding of their intent, the constraints and their understanding of the constraints, their hypotheses and the experiments they're running and the results that they're getting, and how what the work that they're doing is maps within the constraints and helps meet the intent. There's some links here, and I'll make sure I send the slides through so we can make the slides available to people. There's a bunch of blog posts that I've written on this and other topics around strategy deployment. So this is a form of strategy deployment. You can download those A3 templates from my website, my personal blog. And then I wrote a white paper on these 3 C's. So there's some more information on a white paper if you're interested in downloading that and digging into this in a little bit more detail. And then lastly, these are the kind of the primary books that kind of influenced me. I've not necessarily talked about all of these in here, but this is all about how do we treat agile transformations as strategy deployment, as strategic initiatives where people kind of work themselves towards meeting the intent. And that's it. So I'll just leave that slide up in case people want to make a note of any of those, and I can move it back to the other slide as well. But I think we've got 5-7 minutes for questions if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so anyone have any questions? They can ask. Or else you can type your questions in chat box also. Okay, anyone?
Does anybody want to argue the case for one of the wrong answers in the answers that I said were wrong in the quiz? That's always a fun question to ask.
Okay.
Does anybody disagree with anything that I said? I guess not.
Okay. Yeah.
What's the best way for me to make the slides available for people?
Okay. If anyone has any questions, please type in the chat box, or you can directly ask here. Okay. So Karl, I think no one has any questions now.
Okay. So if I send you a copy of the slides, will you be able to send them out? I can also, I'll also post a link on Twitter. So at KJ Scotland, you can see at the bottom, that's my Twitter handle. So if you're on Twitter, I'll post a link there later today, probably.
Yeah, sure, Karl. Sure. So I think we should wrap up now.
Great. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And if anybody has any questions they want to kind of follow up with me privately, again, Twitter's probably a good way of getting hold of me.
Okay. Yeah.
Or actually, if I
okay.
just or email.
Yeah. So thank you, Karl. It was a really nice and engaging sessions, and we appreciate everyone being here. So thank you, everyone. So if you have any questions,
thank you, Karl.
Mail, and you can call me over the phone also.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Karl.
All right. Thank you.